My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I'm 32 years old. What happened when my mother opened a Sunday newspaper last weekend is something that completely shattered her understanding of success, family worth, and which daughter had actually achieved something extraordinary while being dismissed as the family disappointment. Picture this: my mother sitting at her kitchen table with her morning coffee, casually flipping through the local section as she did every Sunday, only to freeze completely when she saw the front page headline about the city's new children's hospital wing, and the photograph of the woman whose $5 million donation had made it possible. You see, that moment when she recognized my face staring back at her from the newspaper wasn't just shock. Was the instant she realized that the daughter she'd told just 18 hours earlier would never be equal to her siblings had just made the largest charitable donation in our city's history. The same daughter she'd dismissed during our family dinner as lacking the drive and intelligence of her brothers and sister was being celebrated as a philanthropist whose generosity would save countless children's lives. Before we dive into this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories about underestimated people proving their worth in the most unexpected ways. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. I love connecting with people who understand that sometimes the most meaningful achievements happen when nobody's watching or believing in you. Let me take you back to that Saturday evening dinner at my parents' house, the weekly family gathering that I'd been attending faithfully for years despite knowing it would inevitably become a showcase for everyone else's achievements, while my contributions went unnoticed or dismissed. The dining room was filled with the usual suspects: my older brother Marcus, a successful corporate lawyer with his wife and 2 children; my younger sister Patricia, a marketing director at a Fortune 500 company with her husband; my young Saint brother David, a medical resident who was the family's current pride and joy; and me, the middle child who had chosen a path that nobody quite understood or respected. Marcus closed a major acquisition deal this week, Mom announced proudly as she served the main course, beaming at her eldest son. "Tell everyone about the client, sweetheart." Marcus launched into a detailed description of his latest legal victory, a complex corporate merger that had earned his firm millions in fees and positioned him for partnership consideration. The table listened with rapt attention as he described the negotiations, the challenges, and the ultimate success that proved his exceptional legal mind. "That's incredible, Marcus," Patricia chimed in. "I just finished a campaign that increased our client's market share by 15%. We're being featured in Marketing Weekly next month." The conversation flowed naturally from Marcus's legal triumph to Patricia's marketing success, with our parents asking detailed questions and expressing genuine admiration for their achievements. David, still early in his medical residency, shared stories about saving lives and learning from renowned surgeons, earning nods of approval and predictions of his brilliant future. I sat quietly, eating my dinner and listening to the familiar pattern of celebration and recognition that never seemed to include me, despite the fact that I'd been building something extraordinary for the past 5 years. "Elena, you've been awfully quiet tonight," Dad finally said, turning his attention to me with the polite interest reserved for family members whose lives weren't particularly noteworthy. "Well, how's your little nonprofit work going?" "My little nonprofit work?" That's how they described the organization I'd founded to provide educational resources and emotional support to families dealing with childhood cancer, work that had consumed my life and generated results none of them had bothered to understand. "It's going well," I said simply. "We've expanded our program significantly this year." "That's nice, dear," Mom said with the tone she used for small talk. "It's good that you've found something that keeps you busy." Something that kept me busy. As if my work was a hobby rather than a mission that had helped over 3,000 families navigate the most difficult period of their lives. "Are you making any money from this nonprofit thing yet?" Marcus asked, his question carrying an undertone that suggested my work was only valuable if it generated personal income. "Nonprofits aren't designed to make money for their founders," I explained patiently, having had this conversation multiple times. "The goal is to serve families in need, not generate profit." "Right, but you have to support yourself somehow," Patricia added. "I mean, charity work is admirable, but at some point you need to think practically about your future. I have a sustainable funding model, and a salary that meets my needs." "A salary from your own organization," David interjected with a light smirk. "That's essentially paying yourself with donated money." The implication that I was somehow taking advantage of charitable donations to fund a lifestyle was particularly galling. Of how legitimate nonprofits operated, or what my actual financial situation looked like. David, that's not how nonprofit salaries work. I started to explain, but Mom interrupted. The important thing is that Elena has found her niche, she said with finality, clearly wanting to move the conversation away from my work and back to more impressive family achievements. Not everyone can be a high achiever like Marcus and Patricia. Not everyone can be a high achiever. The words hit me like a slap, delivered with the casual cruelty that comes from years of dismissing someone's efforts as inherently less valuable than traditional markers of success. What do you mean by that? I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. I mean that we all have different capabilities and ambitions, Mom said, clearly not realizing how offensive her explanation sounded. Some people are driven to achieve great things in their careers, and others are content with smaller scale work. There's nothing wrong with either approach. Smaller scale work. Elena, let's be honest about your situation, she continued, warming to her subject as the rest of the family listened with uncomfortable attention. You've never shown the same level of ambition or intellectual drive as your siblings. Marcus excels in complex legal work, Patricia dominates in competitive corporate environments, and David is saving lives as a doctor. And what am I doing? You're doing charity work with sick children. It's kind and, compassionate, but it's not the same level of professional achievement. You've never demonstrated the ability to compete at their level. The silence that followed was deafening. My own mother had just publicly declared that I lacked the intelligence and drive to achieve anything comparable to my siblings' successes, reducing 5 years of intensive work to charity with sick children, as if it were weekend volunteer. Ring at a local shelter. You don't think what I do requires intelligence or drive? I asked quietly. I think what you do requires a good heart, she said condescendingly. But it doesn't require the same level of strategic thinking, leadership ability, or professional excellence that your siblings demonstrate in their careers. Marcus looked uncomfortable with wit. The direction of the conversation but didn't intervene. Patricia was studying her wine glass intently. David seemed to be enjoying watching me be put in my place by our mother's assessment of my capabilities. The reality is, Mom continued, clearly feeling the need to drive her point home completely, you'll never be equal to your siblings in terms of professional achievement. They're operating at a different level than what you're capable of. And that's okay. Not everyone in a family can be the star performer. Never be equal to your siblings. The words hung in the air like a death sentence on my worth as a person and professional. I could have told them about the $47 in funding I'd raised over 5 years. I could have mentioned the 847 families currently enrolled in our comprehensive support programs, or the 23 research studies my organization had funded that were advancing pediatric cancer treatment. I could have shared the statistics showing that families in our program had 34% better treatment compliance, and significantly lower stress indicators than those receiving standard care alone. But I'd learned over the years that sharing achievements with people who had already decided you weren't capable of real success was an exercise in futility. They'd find ways to minimize, dismiss, or recontextualize anything that didn't fit their predetermined narrative about your limitations. Instead, I finished my dinner, participated in polite conversation about other topics, and left that evening knowing something had fundamentally shifted in my relationship with my family. For 5 years I'd been building something extraordinary while they dismissed my work as small-scale charity. For 5 years, I'd been demonstrating exactly the kind of strategic thinking, leadership ability, and professional excellence Mom claimed I lacked, but doing it in a field they didn't understand or value. But what they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to discover, was that my little nonprofit work had just culminated in the largest private donation to pediatric healthcare in our city's history. If you've ever been told by family that you don't have what it takes to achieve at the same level as your siblings, type underestimated middle child in the comments. What happens next is going to show you exactly how wrong people can be when they mistake quiet competence for lack of ability. The donation that would change everything had been in the works for 8 months, but its roots went back to the very beginning of my organization's existence. When I'd founded Hope and Healing 5 years earlier, I hadn't just wanted to provide support services to families dealing with childhood cancer. I'd envisioned creating a comprehensive model that other cities could replicate, ultimately scaling. our impact to help children nationwide. But scaling required capital, infrastructure, and the kind of institutional partnerships that most people assumed were beyond the reach of someone running a little nonprofit. What my family didn't understand was that I'd spent 5 years building exactly those relationships, proving our model's effectiveness, and positioning Hope and Healing as the kind of organization that major donors and foundations took seriously. The breakthrough had come 6 months earlier when the Morrison Foundation, one of the largest charitable organizations in our state, had completed an extensive evaluation of pediatric support programs across the region. Their conclusion was that Hope and Healing had achieved measurably better outcomes than any other organization they'd studied, and they wanted to fund a major expansion of our model. But there was a condition: they would only provide funding if we could demonstrate community commitment by raising a significant local contribution first. Specifically, they wanted to see $5 million in local funding before they would release their $15 million grant for program expansion. $5 million, an enormous sum for a local fundraising campaign, especially for an organization that most people in our community knew nothing about. Traditional fundraising approaches, galas, direct mail campaigns, corporate sponsorships, might generate hundreds of thousands over several years, but wouldn't reach the level we needed within the Morrison Foundation's timeline. So I'd made a decision that shocked everyone who knew about it. I would make the $5 million contribution myself. The money came from an inheritance I'd received from my great-aunt Catherine 2 years earlier, an inheritance my family knew about but had assumed was much smaller than its actual $6.80 million value. Aunt Catherine had been impressed by my work with Hope and Healing, and had specifically structured her estate to support my charitable efforts, but she'd requested that I not discuss the details with other family members who might try to influence how I used her gift. For 2 years I'd been quietly investing those funds while continuing to live modestly and run my organization on its regular budget. When the Morrison Foundation opportunity arose, I realized that Aunt Catherine's inheritance could become the catalyst for something much larger than she'd probably imagined. By making the $5 million contribution to our own capital campaign, I would trigger the Morrison Foundation's $15 million matching grant, giving Hope and Healing $20 million total to expand our model to 12 other cities over the next 5 years. The local contribution would fund construction of a new children's hospital wing, dedicated specifically to family support services, while the foundation grant would fund program replication nationwide. But I'd wanted the announcement to be handled carefully. Rather than seeking personal recognition, I'd asked that the donation be publicized as coming from a local philanthropist committed to advancing pediatric care, with my identity revealed only if specifically requested by media outlets. The hospital had agreed to announce the gift at their board meeting on Friday, with a press release going out Saturday afternoon and newspaper coverage appearing in Sunday's edition. The timing meant that my family's Saturday dinner dismissal of my capabilities would be followed less than 24 hours later by news coverage of my record-breaking donation. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made sitting with coffee and newspapers feel like a perfect way to start the day. I was in my own kitchen, reading the business section and reviewing final details for the following week's expansion planning meetings, when my phone rang. It was Mom, and her voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from her. "Elena?" she said, her words barely above a whisper. "I just saw the newspaper." "Which article?" "The front page, about the children's hospital donation." She paused, and I could hear pages rustling. "It says, a local philanthropist donated $5 million for a new family support wing." "Elena, the picture. Is this you?" The newspaper had chosen to use a photo from a Hope and Healing event 6 months earlier, where I was presenting our program results to potential funders. In the picture, I was standing at a podium with charts showing our success rates, looking every inch the confident executive that Mom had told me I'd never be. "Yes, that's me. You donated $5 million to the children's hospital? I made a contribution that will leverage additional funding to expand our family support programs nationally." The silence that followed lasted so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Elena," she finally said, "how do you have $5 million to donate to anything? I've been managing resources carefully and building toward this kind of impact for several years. But we thought, last night you said you had a salary that met your needs, not millions of dollars for charitable giving." "I have both. My salary meets my personal needs, and I had other resources available for advancing the mission." "Other resources?" Aunt Catherine's inheritance was larger than I mentioned, and I've been investing it specifically to fund this kind of expansion. Another long pause as she processed this information. The newspaper says this is the largest private donation to pediatric healthcare in the city's history. That's correct. Elena, I don't understand. Last night we were talking about how your work was smaller scale than your siblings' careers. But you've just made a donation that's going to be in the newspaper, that's going to change healthcare for children across the region. Last night you told me I'd never be equal to my siblings in terms of professional achievement. You said I lacked the strategic thinking and leadership ability they demonstrate in their careers. The silence that followed was heavy with the realization of what she'd said, and how completely wrong she'd been. I was wrong, she said quietly. Elena, I was completely wrong about everything. You were wrong about my capabilities, my achievements, and my impact. You dismissed 5 years of work that has helped thousands of families as charity with sick children, while I was actually building something that will now help children nationwide. Can you forgive me? I can forgive you, but I need you to understand that your assumptions about my work and my abilities caused real harm. Being told by my own mother that I'd never measure up to my siblings when I was actually exceeding all their achievements in terms of scale and impact was devastating. How long have you been planning this donation? 8 months of specific planning, but 5 years of building toward this kind of capability. And we never knew. You never asked. When I tried to share information about our programs, our funding, or our expansion plans, the conversation would shift to Marcus's legal cases, or Patricia's marketing campaigns, or David's medical training. My work was treated as less interesting and less important. Because we didn't understand what you were actually building. Because you decided it wasn't worth understanding. There's a difference. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Mom asking questions about my organization, my donation, and the national expansion plans that would result from the Morrison Foundation partnership. For the first time in years, she was genuinely interested in the details of my work, treating my achievements as worthy of the same attention she'd always given my siblings' careers. But the most important call came 2 hours later, when Marcus phoned. Elena, I just saw the newspaper. I had no idea you were operating at this level. What level did you think I was operating at, honestly? I thought you were running a small local charity, maybe helping a few dozen families, making enough to cover basic expenses. I had no idea you'd built something with millions in funding and national expansion potential. That's what I've been trying to share with the family for years. I owe you an apology. We all do. What you've accomplished is extraordinary, and we were too blind or too arrogant to see it. Patricia called an hour later with similar sentiments, followed by David that evening. Each conversation involved the same basic realization. They'd been so focused on traditional markers of success that they'd completely missed the fact that their sister had achieved something far more substantial than any of their individual career victories. But the most meaningful change was in how Mom talked about her children when other people asked about the family. A week later, I overheard her on the phone with her sister. Elena just made a $5 million donation to the Children's Hospital. Can you imagine? My daughter is going to change healthcare for children across the entire region. The newspaper called her a philanthropist, and they're featuring her work in a national magazine next month. The pride in her voice was genuine and complete, exactly the tone she'd always used when discussing Marcus's legal victories or Patricia's marketing successes, or David's medical achievements. 3 months later, when the new hospital wing held its groundbreaking ceremony, Mom insisted that the entire extended family attend to support what she now called Elena's incredible achievement. The woman who had told me I'd never be EQ Al to my siblings was now bragging to anyone who would listen about her daughter, the philanthropist. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, when the Morrison Foundation's $15 million grant was officially announced and Hope and Healing began expanding to 12 new cities. The ceremony included remarks from the foundation president, who specifically praised my strategic vision and leadership in building a replicable model that would help children nationwide. Mom was sitting in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she listened to descriptions of my work that emphasized exactly the qualities she'd claimed I lacked: strategic thinking, leadership ability, and professional excellence at the highest level. After the ceremony, she approached me with something I'd never seen from her before: genuine humility. Elena, I've been thinking about what I said at dinner that night, about you never being equal to your siblings. What about it? I realize now that you weren't unequal to them. You were operating at a level beyond what any of them have achieved. Marcus wins legal cases, Patricia runs marketing campaigns, David treats individual patients. But you've created something that will help thousands of children for generations. Different kinds of success, different kinds of impact. No, Elena. What you've built isn't just different, it's bigger, more important, more lasting. She paused, looking around at the expansion ceremony that was celebrating my vision becoming reality. I was wrong about you in every possible way, and I'm ashamed of how long it took me to see what you were actually accomplishing. The newspaper that made my mother's face go pale wasn't just announcing a donation, it was revealing that the daughter she'd dismissed as incapable of high achievement had actually surpassed everyone else in the family in terms of meaningful impact. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't arguing or defending yourself, it's quietly building something so substantial that the results speak louder than any words could. And sometimes the sweetest vindication is opening the newspaper and seeing your face on the front page, while the people who said you'd never measure up realize they were looking at the wrong measuring stick entirely. The daughter who would never be equal to her siblings hadn't been trying to equal them, she'd been building something that made their individual achievements look small by comparison. Not because their work wasn't valuable, but because her work was changing thousands of lives while they were focused on advancing their own careers. What achievements have you built while being dismissed as less capable than others? What impact have you created while being told you lack the abilities for real success? Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been the underestimated family member who was actually building something extraordinary, you're not alone. Comment quiet impact if you believe the most meaningful achievements often happen when nobody's watching. Share this story with someone who needs to know that being dismissed by family doesn't determine your actual potential for success. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories about family assumptions, hidden achievements, and the moment when newspaper headlines reveal what people couldn't see about your capabilities. I'd love to know. Should family members be more curious about each other's work, or is it natural to focus on achievements we understand better? Let me know in the comments. Remember, your worth isn't determined by their ability to recognize it, but when that recognition finally comes through undeniable public success, it transforms everything about how they see your potential and your place in the family.